All right, good evening, everybody. Everybody, please come in and have a seat if you're in the back or on the side. Make room for folks. If you could, please turn off your phone because that ends up being loud and a challenge. Because we're going to have a really special night. We really are. Here at the zoo, our motto is that the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden is here to inspire every visitor with wildlife every day. And for us, as you know, that includes plants. It includes habitats, it includes biodiversity. And there's no better connection to that than right here in the ecosystem where we live, both in our yards, in our gardens, in our public gardens, in our parks. And that's what the talk will be about tonight, about how that all affects our lives, where we are in the world around us, and particularly what we can do. The reason I'm most excited that Doug Tallamy is here is that he is doing what we try to do, which is he is inspiring. And an hour from now, you'll know exactly what I'm saying, because he is talking about things that are essential and important and also possible, that we can all make a difference. So that's important. You may know this because he's the author of New York Times bestsellers like Bringing Nature Home, Nature's Best Hope, also the author of dozens of scientific articles over the years. And it's just remarkable. You know, he's the head of the entomology department at the University of Delaware as a day job, but is taking it to the street now and is frankly world renowned for that and plays at a very high level. So Doug, we appreciate you took the time to come do it with us. At our zoo, we were founded in 1873 and our original title was Cincinnati Zoological Garden, and we remain that today. We were founded by German immigrants who wanted to have a beautiful park with exotic animals and cultural events. So we'll count tonight as a cultural event, and we're still doing that 150 years later. So here's to that. Please welcome Doug Tallamy.
Good. Hey, what's remarkable is that you're all here to listen to this. That's the important thing. Okay, we have a lot to talk about, so I'm gonna dive right in. I do want to talk about what my idea of nature's best hope is, but before I do that, I want to talk about E.O. Wilson, who, of course, you know, died the day after Christmas this year. Extremely long, extremely productive career. I give you, entire talk on some of the things he did. But one thing that was consistent throughout his entire career was his fight to save life on planet Earth. He loved biodiversity. He knew that we needed it. He knew he had to convince other people that we needed it. And this is a book he wrote in 2016, was his effort to finally try to do that. He said, if we're going to save life anywhere on planet Earth, we have to save nature, we have to save functional ecosystems on at least half of planet Earth. And he spent most of the book talking about the science that supports that statement. And then he ended the book. He didn't tell us a whole bunch about how we were going to actually save nature on half of planet Earth. But of course, to a conservation biologist, this is good news. I mean, we'll just put half the Earth aside and everything will be great. But half of planet Earth is already in some form of agriculture. We've got almost 8 billion people and all of our airports and our roadsides and our detritus in the other half. And we don't have a third half to put aside for nature. So we're wondering, how can we actually do this? I think we can do it. That's what I want to talk about tonight. I think we can realize EO's dream, but we need a new approach to conservation in order to do that. Before we talk about that, let's talk about an oak mass that occurred in 2019, at least along the East Coast. All the members of the Red Oak group got together and decided to make their acorns at the same time. And that's what it looked like in a lot of places. Well, I'm easily entertained. So I just took one of those acorns and I just stared at it. But I was rewarded because an insect started to chew its way out of the acorn, first it chewed a little hole for its head, then it forced its head through there, and it forced its entire body through that hole. It was a tight squeeze. It looked like the Pillsbury Doughboy. Finally, it plopped down, and that is a dangerous time for that insect larva because it is good to eat. A lot of things are after it. So it gets to safety by wiggling and squirming beneath the soil surface in about 30 seconds. And once it's underground, it stretches in all directions and forms a chamber. And within that chamber, converts itself to a pupa. And then surprisingly, it stays there for 2 years. After 2 years, comes out as an acorn weevil. That's what an acorn weevil looks like. A lot of people think weevils have big noses. It looks like they do, but that's actually an extension of the head capsule. And the mouth parts are way down there at the end of that extension. And they take those mouth parts and they chew a hole into the center of the acorn. And that is how the larva, then they turn around and lay an egg in that hole. And that's how the larva gets down into the center of the acorn. Why do they spend 2 years underground? Well, it takes red oak acorns 18 months to complete their development. So if they came out the very next year, there wouldn't be enough acorns. Of course, after they leave the acorn, that leaves a hole, a true vacuum. You know that nature abhors a vacuum. And in this case, she's filled it with 3 species of temnothorax ants, tiny little ants where the entire colony lives in the holes made by acorn weevils after they left an acorn. And if scouts find a new hole in a new acorn, they get all excited because their old acorn is falling apart. So they want to tell everybody it is time to move, grab the larvae, grab the eggs, move the whole colony into the new acorn. That takes about 30 minutes. And then post a guard. There's a guard right there. Make sure nobody else comes in. And that's where they'll live for the next 2 years until this acorn falls apart. So what's my point with this little story? That is just one of literally millions of very specialized interactions, largely between animals and plants, that comprise the bulk of nature. This is another one, the relationship between jays and acorns. Jays all over the world are the primary disperser of oak acorns. They'll take an acorn, they'll take an acorn, fly about a mile from the parent tree, and then they want to store it for winter use. So they tap it beneath the soil surface and then go back in the wintertime and have something to eat. But for every 4 acorns they bury, they only remember where 3 are. No, for every 4 acorns, they only remember where 1 is. So for every 4 acorns they're burying, they've actually planted 3 oak trees. Specialized interaction between pileated woodpeckers and carpenter ants. That's what they rear their young on, carpenter ants. So if you don't have enough carpenter ants, you won't have a lot of pileated woodpeckers. And you won't have a lot of carpenter ants unless you have the big trees that make those carpenter ants. You won't have this bee, Andrena facilii, unless you have Facilia. That is the only pollen that bee can rear its young on. And it turns out that pollen specialization is very common in our native bees. We have almost 4,000 species of native bees in North America, and over 1/3 of them can only reproduce in the pollen of particular plants. You won't have the Baltimore checker spot unless you have white turtlehead. Again, just like E.O. Wilson, I could talk for weeks and weeks about nature specialized interactions. The point I want to make tonight, though, is that these interactions, nature itself is on the ropes. And it's on the ropes because we did not take Teddy Roosevelt's advice. Way back in 1908, Teddy heard the state of Arizona was going to mine the Grand Canyon. So he went to the canyon, looked out over the edge, and he said, leave it as it is. And with those 5 words, he started the process of creating the Grand Canyon National Park. Well, we didn't leave it as it was. There's only about 5% of the lower 48 states that's anything close to its original pristine ecological condition. And those typically are mountaintops. And that's because we have logged the country repeatedly. We've tilled it, we've drained it, we have grazed it. We've got 770 million acres of rangeland in this country. That's 4.5 times the size of Texas dedicated to cows. And of course, we paved it or otherwise developed it. We have straightened our rivers and dammed them, and you can spell that any way you want. We have polluted our skies and changed our climate for centuries to come. We've drained our aquifers. We've introduced more than 3,300 species of plants from other continents, many of which are running amok in our natural areas. In short, we've carved up those natural areas into tiny remnants of their former selves. And each one of those remnants is too small and too isolated to sustain the amount of nature we need them to sustain. We need them to sustain to support us. That's our life support systems. So why have we done this? I don't know, but I suspect we thought that the Earth, our nest, was so large we could foul it forever and there wouldn't be any consequences. But of course, we were wrong about that, and that's why we're seeing some pretty scary headlines these days, like the insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Talking about global insect decline. Followed by this one. North America's lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. That's 1/3 of our North American bird population, already gone. Not a prediction, already gone. And of course, the UN says we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction, probably in the next 20 years. And that was 2 years ago. So now in the next 18 years. You know, it makes a nice headline, but it is not an option, folks. We need these species. They keep us around on planet Earth. So we have to make sure that that doesn't happen. I could go on talking about the pox that we humans have delivered upon the environment, thus upon all of our houses. But that's not what this talk is about. This talk is about a cure for that pox. It's a cure that'll take small efforts from lots of people like you and me. Those efforts will deliver enormous physical, psychological, and environmental benefits to everybody. Let's return briefly to this headline. The insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Well, back to E.O. Wilson, he told us what it would mean if we were to lose our insects. And he did it way back in 1987 with this paper, The Little Things That Run the World. And again, his message was very clear. Life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, so would most of our flowering plants. And if most of our flowering plants disappeared, that would so drastically change energy flow through our terrestrial ecosystems that the food webs that support our animals, the amphibians, the reptiles, the birds, the mammals, even our freshwater fishes, those food webs would collapse and those animals would disappear. The biosphere, the living portion of the earth, would rot because we would have lost insect decomposers that right now rapidly turn over nutrients, and all we would have is bacteria and fungi. And of course, humans wouldn't survive any of those drastic changes. There is some good news, and that is that that doesn't have to happen. We can save our insects, we can save our birds, we can save nature itself, but we're going to have to change the way we landscape in order to do it. Why is that? Well, remember, humans are products of nature. We are totally dependent on the life support that healthy ecosystems provide for us and everything else. Here are some of the things that plants provide. Oxygen, pretty important. Clean water, equally important. They slow its journey to the sea or it becomes too salty to use. Carbon capture, enormously important today. They're pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, out of harm's way, building their tissues out of that carbon, but then pumping the extra carbon into the soil. Our soils are brown or black because of the carbon that plant roots have deposited there over the eons. Plants are building topsoil, they're holding it in place, they're preventing floods, they're dampening severe weather, they're converting sunlight into food. If we lose our plants, we're going to have to eat sunlight. That will be hard. What do animals do for plants? They provide pest control services. They pollinate nearly 90% of our flowering plants. They disperse plant seeds. So designing landscapes like this that don't produce ecosystem services, that destroy the production of ecosystem services is not a good idea. Never was a good idea. But today it's a terrible idea because we need more ecosystem services today than ever before because there are more of us demanding those services. And, you know, we tend to take those services, but when we take them and there's not enough, we're taking them from other organisms that need them too. And that's why we're in the 6th great extinction that the planet has ever experienced. We do have parks and preserves. They're not big enough. They're obviously not working, or we wouldn't be in that big 6th extinction. So now we have to start practicing conservation outside of parks and preserves on landscapes like this. Now, there have been visionaries through the ages who recognized that we humans needed to work on our relationship with planet Earth. And Aldo Leopold was one of the most eloquent. He wrote extensively in the first half of the 1900s. One of the things he said is the oldest task in human history is to live in a piece of land without spoiling it. There have been indigenous groups that have been able to do that for long periods, but our huge Western societies and our huge Asian societies are terrible at doing that. We habitually take more from the earth than it has to offer, completely wrecking an area, going to another area, doing the same thing, not sustainable behavior. But Aldo had a lot of faith in humans. He believed that we could develop what he called a land ethic. He knew we had to use the land. We had to farm and lumber and graze and mine and do all of those things. But he really believed we could learn to do them gently enough that we did not destroy local ecosystems. That's what he called the land ethic. And he wrote about it in the Sand County Almanac. What he did not write about, though, was developing a land ethic where we actually lived. And I'm not sure why that was, but I suspect the notion that humans and nature cannot coexist in the same place at the same time. That notion was so deeply embedded in the culture of Aldo Leopold's day, still embedded in our own culture, unfortunately, that he may not have recognized it as an option. But what I want to argue this evening, though, is not only is living with nature an option, it is now the only viable option that's left to us. In the past, of course, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. We now need to turn that on its head and practice conservation where there are a lot of people, because that's pretty much everywhere. In other words, we have to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes, not hang on by a thread, not get diminished every year, but thrive. Where should we start? Well, let's go back to private property. If we don't do conservation, if we don't practice conservation on private property, we're going to fail because most of the land is privately owned. 78% of the entire country is privately owned. 85.6% of the US east of the Mississippi is privately owned. 95% of Texas is privately owned. 98% of Maine is privately owned. We can't ignore private property or we will fail. Now, when I talk about conservation, I'm not using the word correctly. We do want to conserve any bits of nature that are still out there, absolutely. But I'm talking about restoration. I'm talking about putting it back, rebuilding what we already have dismantled. And before you tell me that you're not going to be able to put it back exactly the way it was at some specified point of time, I know that, but that doesn't mean we can't reunite enough of those specialized interactions that I opened the talk with to recreate or create for the first time new functional relationships that form ecosystems, that create ecosystem services, even if it's not exactly what was on that property some years before. But not all species contribute to ecosystem function equally, so we have to start with the building blocks, the ones that supply the most energy. And there's two groups that we can't do without. One of them is the flowering plants and the pollinators that allow those plants to reproduce. They are capturing energy from the sun through photosynthesis, turning it into food, and then storing that food in their plant parts. And that is the food that fuels the rest of life on terrestrial Earth. So now we have all the food wrapped up in plant parts, mostly leaves. If you don't get that food to animals, you don't have any animals. And most vertebrates do not eat plants directly. Most vertebrates eat invertebrates that ate plants. Most of those invertebrates are insects, and not just any insect. It turns out that caterpillars are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. So if we design landscapes that don't have a lot of caterpillars in them, that's going to be failed food webs and eventually failed ecosystems. Let's use the Carolina chickadee as an example. Now, I believe you've got the black-capped chickadee here, or maybe you got the Carolina. They're practically the same bird doing the same thing. They're the birds at our feeders all winter long eating seeds, and we tend to think that's what they need. Well, 50% of their diet in the wintertime is seeds. The other 50%, even in the wintertime, is insects and spiders. But when it comes time to reproduce, when it comes time to make more chickadees, their babies can't eat seeds. Most baby birds cannot eat seeds. So they feed them exclusively on insects, and most of those insects, it turns out, are caterpillars. And chickadees are not exceptions. 96% of our terrestrial birds are rearing their young on insects, and most of those insects are caterpillars. How do I know that? There's a number of lines of evidence that suggest that, but this is a citizen science project that one of my grad students, Ashley Kennedy, did a few years ago. She put out a call to bird photographers across the world, no, across the country, and I gotta get my line. She said, please take pictures of birds during the breeding season when they're carrying prey items to the nest, and send those pictures to me, Ashley. I will identify what the prey items are in the beak and reconstruct the nestling diet for as many species of birds in North America as I can. And she got thousands of pictures, so it's a big success. She did a lot of identifying, and you're looking at a summary of her results. The green bars are the percentage of the nestling diets in the 20 most common bird families that were caterpillars. And in 16 out of those 20 common bird families, caterpillars dominated the diet. So again, what would happen if we developed landscapes that do not, hello? That do not make enough caterpillars? Most of our birds will not be able to successfully reproduce. So there's something special about caterpillars. What is it? There's actually several things special about caterpillars, and one of them is that they are soft. Think of this guy as if he's a little sausage with a very thin wrapper. The thin wrapper is his exoskeleton. It's cuticle. It's made of chitin. It's undigestible. And because they're soft, you can stuff caterpillars down the throat of your babies without fear of injuring them. If you ever watched a parent bird rear their young, they're pretty rough. Beak's like a plunger. They just stuff it down there. Caterpillars are also relatively large prey items. So one medium-sized caterpillar is equal to the biomass of 200 aphids. And many of our smaller birds do chase aphids around, but do you want to chase 200 aphids or get one caterpillar? They're nutritious. They're very high in fat, very high in protein, very low percentage of chitin of exoskeleton compared to many other insects, particularly beetles. Beetles are not like little sausages. They're like little tanks. So much of a beetle is undigestible. Caterpillars are also the best source of carotenoids for birds during the breeding season. And I mentioned carotenoids not because I love organic chemistry, but because I'm a vertebrate and you're a vertebrate and birds are vertebrates, and we vertebrates cannot make our own carotenoids. Only plants make carotenoids. So we have to get our carotenoids from plants, and we have to get them from plants because carotenoids are essential components of vertebrate diets. Where are the birds getting their carotenoids from? From what they eat, of course. But look, carotenoid content is not equally distributed across bird prey items. These first two bars here are types of caterpillars. They have far more carotenoids than other types of bird prey. Here are the adult caterpillars here, the moths and butterflies themselves. They have far fewer carotenoids because The adults, the moths and butterflies, are not eating green leaves. It's the caterpillars that eat the green leaves where the carotenoids are. And way over here, there's the earthworm. So the early bird gets the worm, but he doesn't get any carotenoids when he gets the worm. So that study and a number of others are suggesting the caterpillars are not optional parts of bird diets. They're essential parts of bird diets, most birds. So let's just generalize and say birds need caterpillars. The next question is, how many caterpillars do they need? Is 1 or 2 enough, or 1 or 2 a day enough? Well, that's a good question. Let's go back to chickadees. There's a lot of data on chickadees. How many caterpillars does it take to make a nest of chickadees? 1 or 2 is not enough. 1 or 2 a day is not enough. It takes thousands, 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to get the baby chicks to the point where they leave the nest, where they fledge. And after they leave the nest, the parents continue to feed them caterpillars another 21 days. So you're really talking about tens of thousands of caterpillars to make 1 nest of chickadees. And that's a bird that's 1/3 of an ounce. That's 4 pennies worth of bird. And if you want chickadees to breed in your yard, you've got to have all those caterpillars in your yard, because chickadees forage about 50 meters from the nest. They're not flying 5 miles down the road to the nearest woodlot. And if we landscape in a way that does not produce all those caterpillars, all those insects, that's called insect decline. And it's really looking like insect decline is directly related to the bird declines that people are measuring. We went to the original data set of Rosenberg et al. That's the Smithsonian group that said we've lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. And we divided the birds, the terrestrial birds, into 2 groups. On the left here, come back. On the left. On the left, we've got the birds that require insects, the ones that typically when they're reproducing, they're feeding their young insects. But over here on the right, we've got the birds that do not require insects. There's a few of them, the finches and the doves, the crossbills, they make a milk out of the seeds that they eat, and they can feed that to their young. But look, the birds that do not require insects, the ones over here, I know you can't see my pointer here, but the one on the right, they didn't decline at all in the last 50 years. But the birds that require insects declined on average 10 million individuals per species. So it doesn't prove cause and effect, but it certainly does suggest that there is a relationship between the amount of bird food there and the amount of birds. If you take away the bird food, you lose the birds. So we need a new goal for landscaping. In the past, we've had one goal, and that's to make our landscapes pretty. And we're good at that, and we're not going to give that up. Now we need to get a little smarter about it. We need to make pretty landscapes that are also ecologically functional, and they're not going to be ecologically functional unless we put a lot of insects in there, particularly caterpillars. So how do we add caterpillars to landscapes? You do that by adding the plants that make those caterpillars, that support those caterpillars. That seems pretty straightforward, but there is a catch, and that is that most plants do not support a lot of caterpillars. So we have to be fussy about it. We have to add the plants that do support a lot of caterpillars. And we have to be fussy about it because the caterpillars themselves are fussy about it. And the monarch butterfly illustrates that perfectly. You can have all the crepe myrtle and all the burning bush and all the bush honeysuckle and all the hostas and all the barberry and all the ginkgos and all the things that we typically landscape with in your yard, and you won't make a single monarch butterfly. The only thing that's going to make a monarch butterfly is one of the milkweeds. That's called host plant specialization. And most of the insects that eat plants are host plant specialists, just like the monarch. Why? Because plants have made them specialized. Plants don't want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction. So they've loaded their leaves with nasty tasting chemicals, secondary metabolic compounds that make those leaves either bitter or downright toxic. And it's a really effective defense that keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world. And if you don't believe me, when you go outside, eat a plant. See if you like it. You're not going to like it. And that's why it's green out there in the summertime. Not because there's no insects out there that want to eat those plants. It's because most of the insects that are out there cannot eat most of the plants that are out there. Those plants are too well protected. But we do know that insects eat plants. So how do they do that? How do they get around those chemical defenses? Well, this is where the specialization comes in. 90% of the insects that eat plants, so almost all of them, are host plant specialists. They can only eat the particular plants for which they have developed the adaptations to circumvent those chemical defenses. They develop enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify particular chemicals, behavioral adaptations and life history adaptations that minimize the insect's exposure to those compounds. Now, every plant lineage that's out there protects itself with a unique cocktail of chemical defenses. So an insect can't adapt to all of them. So you usually pick one or two that are very closely related, making pretty similar defenses, and they develop those adaptations for those plants. In other words, they specialize on particular plants. And that's why when we bring in plants from other continents and we put them in our landscapes, and it's not just a few landscapes, there are 135 million acres of residential landscapes in our country, and that figure gets bigger every year. And if they're dominated by plants from other continents, you don't have a food web there. And then if those same plants escape into our natural areas and just look around you at your bush honeysuckle, then you don't have a food web there either. There are three kinds of plants. There are plants that contribute energy to local food webs so that you have a food web. There are plants that do not contribute energy to a local food web. And there are plants that actively detract energy from a local food web. Contributor, great example would be one of the oaks. They're contributing the most energy. We'll talk about why in a few minutes. A ginkgo would be a great example of a non-contributor. It's not detracting, it's just there, but it's not adding any energy to the food web because look, nothing can eat it. There aren't any caterpillars transferring energy. So think of your ginkgo as if it's a statue. It's just there. Then, of course, we have our invasive plants, things like calorie pear or bush honeysuckle that not only don't make any insects, they escape into our natural areas and push out the plants that do make insects. So they're actively detracting energy from our local food webs. And that, of course, is what a typical calorie pear invasion looks like. But you know what invasions look like. All I'm trying to say here is that plant choice matters. If we don't pick the right plants for our restorations when we're trying to rebuild food webs and all these places we've destroyed them, it's not going to work. And I'm going to give you three examples of how well it does work when we do choose the right plants. I'm going to start with my house right here in Oxford, Pennsylvania. This is where Cindy and I moved in the year 2000. It was part of a farm that was broken up into 10-acre lots. It had been mowed for hay, the last thing they did. So not much there. And that's what it looked like when we moved in. Well, in order to rebuild the food webs, you got to put those caterpillars back. So these are just a few examples of how that worked. I want to see if I can get the Canadian owlet to make a living at our house. We didn't have any Canadian owlets. I'd never seen a Canadian owlet. And people say, why'd you choose a Canadian owlet? Well, I looked through Dave Wagner's Caterpillars of Eastern North America, and I said, that's a pretty one. Let's start with that one. That's what the adult looks like, just like a leaf. But you don't have Canadian owlets unless you have meadow rue. That's just like a monarch only on milkweed. Canadian owlets only on meadow rue. We didn't have any meadow rue, no meadow rue anywhere around us. So I got some meadow rue seeds, planted them. They grew very nicely, but this was early on, and I actually had very little faith that Canadian owlets would be able to find my meadow rue. So I didn't even go out and check it for about 2 months after I planted it. Then I was walking by for another reason. I turned around and here's Canadian owlets all over my meadow rue. They had found it right away. I'm still surprised about that. So now we have a good population of meadow rue and a good population of Canadian owlets. So we've added 2 species to our property. The restoration has begun. Same story with the goldenrod stowaway. That's a misnomer. This beautiful moth has nothing to do with goldenrod. It's a specialist on that plant, Bidens aristosa, ditch daisy. We didn't have any ditch daisy, but I did know where there's some ditch daisy in a power line cut about 14 miles away. So I went and got some seeds, planted them at home. They grew very nicely. It took a year for the goldenrod stowaway to find my Bidens, but they did. Now we got a good population of both of those. So now we've added 4 species to the property. Hackberry emperor. I wanted the hackberry emperor not because it's the most beautiful butterfly in the world, but because it belongs there. It's one of the species that ought to be there. But as its name suggests, it's a specialist on hackberry, on celtis. We didn't have any hackberry. So I planted hackberry. I had to wait 4 years for the butterflies to find my hackberry, but they did. Last June, I looked at one of my hackberry emperor, one of my hackberry branches, and there were 9 hackberry emperor caterpillars on a single branch. So another big success. Now we've added 6 species to the property, and that's how it went. I did not plant goldenrod; came in on its own, and along with it came a lot of the caterpillars that depend on goldenrod, like the beautiful brown-hooded owlet, the Arcigera flower moth, the goldenrod leaf miner, the distinct Sparaginothus, the goldenrod gall moth. Goldenrod supports 110 species of caterpillars where I live. Planted Virginia creeper. Yes, Virginia creeper. I hear that people don't like Virginia creeper. I just don't know why. It's a great native plant. It's got good fall color, can climb our trees without girdling them. It's a good ground cover, makes valuable berries right up there. They're valuable because they're high in fat. That's what the birds need in the fall. It's a great pollinator plant, believe it or not. It makes tiny inconspicuous flowers. You don't even know it's in bloom until you see the big cloud of bees around it. Remember, when you're making a pollinator garden, you're making for the pollinators. If it's not big and showy for you, that's okay. I planted Virginia creeper because it is the best host plant for the large sphinx moths that are the primary component of cardinal diets. Things like the Pandora sphinx and its beautiful adult, the lettered sphinx, the hog sphinx, the abbot sphinx, all on Virginia creeper. One of the evening primrose moth, or see if I could get the evening primrose moth because it's beautiful. I like beauty like anybody else. Well, believe it or not, we didn't have any evening primrose, any Enothera, so I planted that. The moth came, spends the day with its head stuffed in the flowers. It's very cute. And I planted lots of oaks. Now, these are just examples of the plants we put back, but I want to focus on oaks for a while because they are such important plants. This is the Bedford oak in Bedford, New York. People argue about whether it's 200 years old, no, 400 years old or 500 years old. It's enormous. And I hear people say, I am not going to plant an oak because I won't live long enough to enjoy it. And if you can only enjoy your oak when it's 400 years old, you're right, you won't. But if you can enjoy what your oaks contribute to your local food web, remember that's our new goal, you can enjoy them immediately. And I can say that with confidence because I planted most of my oaks as acorns, which means they were free, or as 2-foot bare root whips, which means they cost $1.50 each. And immediately they started to bring in the moths that laid the eggs that became caterpillars that ran the food web in my yard. Things like the solitary oak leaf miner, Juvenil's dusky wing, yellow-shouldered moth, Suzuki's promolactus, the red-washed caterpillar, the yellow-vested moth, the orange-tufted oneida, the spiny oak caterpillar, the two-spotted oak punky. Come back here. The variable oak leaf caterpillar, the red-humped oakworm, the orange-humped oakworm, the pink-striped oakworm, the hesitant dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the streaked dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the crown bucolatrix, the orange-patched smoky wing, the white-blotched heterocampa, the oblique heterocampa, the red-line panapoda, the laugher, and literally hundreds more species of caterpillars have come to the oaks on our property, and they come right away. This is the pin oak. This popped its head above the leaves, and there's a caterpillar standing on the ground eating the leaves of that tree. You don't have to wait decades or hundreds of years for your oak to start to rebuild your local food web. This is what our house looks like today from the same place where I took that first picture. We got a little lawn here. We're very traditional. But I have put some plants back, not all of them. I add plants whenever I get a chance. And as the years went by and our research showed that, hey, it's all about the number of caterpillars there. About 6 years ago, I decided to, 5 years ago, try to get a picture of every single species of moth that's making a living on our property. And I'm still at it. But I am up to 1,140 species of moths that I've taken a picture of so far. Now we have 10 acres. Pennsylvania is 2.4 million acres. So on 1/240,000th of the landmass, we have 44% of all the moths that occur in the entire state. And because so many of those are types of bird food, we have recorded 60 species of birds that have bred on our 10 acres. Not flew by, but bred. Why am I telling you this? This is another headline we see all the time. The World Wildlife Fund says that we have lost 2/3 of our wildlife since 1970. Terrible statistic, but I'm thinking, not at our house. I am convinced we have increased biodiversity by more than 2/3, and it didn't take that long, and it wasn't that hard. We just put the plants back. Imagine what would happen if we all put the plants back. These are bad statistics, but we can turn it around. We can turn it around for most of the species that are out there. All I'm saying is don't give up, don't give up. We talked at dinner time. I'm Mr. Positive. I tested positive, so don't give up. I didn't really, no. But I know what you're thinking. We've got 10 acres. A lot of people have less land than that. Will it work on smaller plots in suburbia? So that's a good question. Let's go to Margie and Dan Terpstra's house in Kirkwood, Missouri. They have 0.6 acres, 18 times less land than Cindy and I have. And they live in the middle of suburbia. They're surrounded by everybody with the big lawns. When they moved into their yard, it looked like your roadsides. It was covered with bush honeysuckle. So the first thing they did was get rid of that. Then they planted 75 species of native plants, put in a water feature, and then they sat back and started to count the birds that were using their yard. They're up to 149 bird species, including 35 warbler species. If any of you are birders, you know that's a good number. Just to compare that to our house, we've only recorded 8 warbler species at our house. So yes, it works on smaller properties. What about urban yards though? Let's go to Pam Carlson's house in Chicago. And I mean in Chicago, right on the other side of that wall there is O'Hare Airport. She lives right next to it. She's got 1/10 of an acre. That's 3 times smaller than the average lot size in North America. And she's not connected to any natural area. So she's a little island. It's a pretty island. And I will admit, Pam Carlson is a native plant designer, so she's good at it. But she did the same thing. She got rid of her non-native plants, put in 60 species of native plants, including a water feature. Then she started to count the birds using her yard, and she's up to 124 species that have used her 1/10 of an acre, including a woodcock. There's Pam's woodcock. So if you haven't seen a woodcock lately, go to Pam's house in Chicago. Okay, 4 things we need to think about if we're going to succeed in a big way. And the first is, we have to talk about those big lawns. We have, as of 2005, we had 40 million acres of the US in lawn, which is an area the size of New England dedicated to an ecological deadscape. Now I know this is a status symbol. We have to do this and we have to display our Halloween costume or decorations too. But what if we cut the area of lawn in half? What if we took areas like this and we put some native plants in them, like Dan Getman did there? He sent me this picture a few months ago. That was a big lawn and he's putting in native plants. This is the 2nd year of the planting. So he's very happy about it. Well, that would give us 20 million acres that we could put towards conservation. And if we do this at home, we can create a new national park that I'm calling Homegrown National Park. And it will be big. It'll be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badland National Park, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, plus the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. Add up all those parks, still less than 20 million acres. So Homegrown National Park will be the biggest park in the country. What do we get when we put a park at home? You get the opportunity to develop either for the first time or rekindle a personal relationship with the natural world, with good old Mother Nature. At your own time, your own pace, all you have to do is go outside, or all you have to do is look out your window, really. You can avoid crowds. You know, if you go to a real national park, 375 million people did last year, you know what you're gonna see. It's free, there's no admission fee, it's never closed no matter what pandemic comes down the pike, no travel hassles. You get to experience the natural world alone, which I think is essential to developing that personal relationship with Mother Nature, not mediated by somebody else. And it's particularly important for our poor kids who are suffering from nature deficit disorder, according to Richard Louv. So we're trying, we get 30 kids, we put them on a bus with a teacher, they drive for an hour to a natural area, then they walk around for an hour and the teacher tells them not to touch anything. Then they get back in the bus and they go home, and that's their experience with the natural world, which I'm sure is better than nothing. But it's really been an experience with 30 other kids and a teacher telling them not to touch anything. If they go out in their yard alone and there's some part of nature there and they get to know it, they fall in love with it, that is an essential part of their training to becoming good stewards of planet Earth. Alone, no parental supervision. When we hover over our kids, we're sending the message, this is dangerous. You better not be doing it. They'll work it out. They'll come home. I guarantee it. And it's so important because they are the future stewards of the planet. If they don't know how to be a steward, if they don't know they're supposed to be stewarding the planet, they don't know what that means. If they don't love stewarding the planet, they're going to be lousy stewards. And we cannot afford any more lousy stewardship. And maybe they will learn how to hunt lizards, which I'm learning from my own granddaughter, Zoe, who lives in Hawaii on a very modest patch of nature. It's a piece of grass with a hedge, but there are anole lizards there. And when she discovered that, she sent me this picture to describe how you hunt lizards. You get on the ground, you cover yourself with leaves and sticks so the lizards can't see you coming. Then you crawl towards the lizard very slowly. No smiling. This is serious business. You can wear your best dress, that's okay. But you sneak up on the lizard, you catch the lizard, you put him in an aquarium, you learn how to take care of the lizard, you fall in love with the lizard, with that part of the natural world. Oh, I don't think Zoe's going to be crawling on the lawn the rest of her life in her best dress catching lizards. But I guarantee that experience is going to help her be a good steward of the planet. She's going to remember doing that the rest of her life. If you want your kids to do more than catch lizards, get Nancy Stranisti's nature play at home, dozens of examples of how to expose kids to the natural world right where they live. And if you want to join Homegrown National Park, please do. It is free. You go to our website, homegrownnationalpark.org, and register your property on the map, just the location and the amount of area you are being a good steward of, or you're pledging to be a good steward of. Maybe you're going to reduce some of the lawn. Maybe you've already got a whole bunch of really important trees on there. Maybe you're protecting some acreage of a woodlot. All that's got to go on to the map. And then your area of your county is going to light up with a little firefly. And the object is the real object of this is to help change the culture around the country. Get the message that we all are responsible for good earth stewardship, whether you're a member of the choir or not, especially if you're not a member of the choir. Get that message to go viral. We're hoping that this social media type of activity will get people to join just so they can be part of the group, the successful group. And the whole country is going to light up. We've got over 15,000 people on the map right now. I will be happy when we have 150 million people on the map. So we got a little bit to go. So please join Homegrown National Park. And no, we're not using your data, whatever that means. Okay, we're going to shrink the lawn. What plants are we going to put in the area that was once lawn? I'm going to argue that some of them have to be what I'm calling keystone plants. Now remember what a keystone is. That's the Roman arch. The keystone is the stone in the middle of the arch. And if you take it out of the arch falls down. Well, if you take keystone plants out of your local food web, the food web collapses because keystone plants are making most of the food. Just 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar foods that drives those food webs. So think of the keystone plants and the ecological house that you're building as the 2x4s that hold that house up. They're essential. They're the support. You can't build a house out of wallpaper. And that's what we've been trying to do for the last 100 years. You're not through building your house when you've got your keystone plants, but it's an essential first step. So the question is no longer simply, are native plants better than non-native plants ecologically? On average, they certainly are, but there are a lot of native plants that don't contribute all that much either. So the question really is, do we want to favor the plants that contribute the most to our local pollinators and our local caterpillars or not? That's our choice. What does contribute the most? In 84% of the counties in which they occur, it's one of the oaks. 557 species of caterpillars supported in the mid-Atlantic states, over 950 species nationwide. There's no other plant genus that comes close to that in terms of supporting food webs. How do you find out what the best plants are where you live? You go to Native Plant Finder and the National Wildlife Federation website, put in your zip code and the ranked list of the most powerful woody plant genera on this side and herbaceous plant genera over on the right will pop up for your county. Now I stopped the list there because I ran out of room. The lists are much bigger than that. But this list right here will look very similar to what you're going to have here in Ohio. All right, we're going to shrink the lawn. We're going to put in keystone plants. We're going to invite a lot of insects to our yard, and then we're going to kill them with our security light, which is not the goal. So a lot of research showing that light pollution at night is one of the major causes of insect declines around the world. And these are all the ways that lights kill insects at night, particularly those nocturnal moths that are making all of those all-important caterpillars. But to me, this is good news. It's good news because we have to turn around insect decline. We've already lost more than 50% of the insects on the planet. And remember, they're the little things that run the world. Can't afford to do that. So if we can reverse that and start to rebuild insect populations by flicking a switch, we're getting off easy. Now, there's a lot of switches we have to flick, but there's a lot of us to flick those switches. But I know what you're going to say. I can't turn off the light over my barn or over my garage or over my front porch because the bad man will come. All right, put a motion sensor on your security light so it only turns on when the bad man does come. And the first thing you're going to recognize is the bad man doesn't come very often. And if you don't want to do that, take the white bulb out of your security light and put in a yellow bulb. A yellow LED is the best because yellow wavelengths are far less attractive to nocturnal insects than our white or bluish wavelengths. If we switched out our white lights for yellow lights overnight, we would save millions of insects and probably millions of dollars too if we used LEDs. So we're going to shrink the lawn. We're going to put in keystone plants. We're going to turn out our lights. Then we're going to invite Mosquito Joe to come kill all our insects. This is a booming business around the country. Mosquito Joe is single-handedly undoing everything I've been talking about for the last 15 years. But he says, it's okay. This is a natural product. It's pyrethroids. It is a natural product. It's industrial strength pyrethroid, but that's the same compound that's found in chrysanthemums. But let me remind you, cyanide is a natural product too. So I'm not sure that's a good example. He also says it only kills mosquitoes. And I wish he was right about that. But in fact, it kills all insects, including monarchs. There was a big monarch kill, hundreds of dead monarchs on the ground when they migrated through Mosquito Joe, not this fall, but previous fall. I mean, can you imagine? It's hitting everything that's out there. The interesting thing is it does not control mosquitoes, which is the goal. You don't control mosquitoes in the adult stage. You control it in the larval stage. It's very hard to control mosquitoes in the adult stage because you have to kill 90% of them. Mosquito Joe kills between 10 and 50%. So he's not even close to actually being effective, which is why he has to keep coming back and back, and you get to keep paying him and paying him. If you really want to control mosquitoes, get a bucket, fill it full of water. People say, how big a bucket? I don't care. Get a bucket, fill it full of water, put in a handful of straw or hay, and put it out in the sun for a couple of days. Let it ferment. You're building up the population of diatoms and algae, and that is what mosquito larvae eat. That becomes an irresistible brew to female mosquitoes who want to lay their eggs. They're going to oviposit in your bucket. So they lay their eggs in your bucket. Then you go to the hardware store and you buy a mosquito dunk. You get a sheet for $9, something like that. That's Bacillus thuringiensis. You put in one of those discs, that's a natural bacterium that only kills aquatic diptera. And the only aquatic diptera in your bucket is mosquito larvae. So if a dragonfly gets in there, doesn't hurt it a bit. If a bird drinks it, if a dog drinks it, if your child drinks it, no problem. You might put a coarse screen over it so your chipmunk doesn't jump in and drown. But if everybody did this, it would be a very cheap, targeted way to kill mosquitoes without killing everything else. Fourth thing we need to do is to landscape in a way that allows caterpillars to complete their development. And we're really just starting to think about this, but here's an example. I live in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where oaks, and the oaks are just an example, support 511 species of caterpillars. A few of them, like the polyphemus moth, complete their development on the tree. The caterpillars eat the leaves, they spin a cocoon and hang from the branch, then they emerge as an adult, then they do it all over again. Everything happens on the tree. I wish everything did that, but most species don't. 94% of them finish growing as caterpillars on the tree, then they drop from the tree and they wiggle themselves beneath the ground if it's loose enough, and they pupate underground, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that's under the tree. And that's the problem. There is no leaf litter under the tree. We don't tolerate it. We make sure it's gone, and we mow and compact the soil under our tree so that it's rock hard so the caterpillars can't get underground, which makes this an ecological trap. Let's say those plants are all oaks, and they call in lots of moths, and they lay their eggs, and the caterpillars develop, and they drop down, then they die. And then the next generation, they're smaller. I am convinced that this is another major cause of insect declines around the country. And of course, the cement landscape is not the answer either. This is what most people do. You have a tree in a yard, and this summer I got a new student coming in. We're going to start to measure caterpillar success in a situation like that, but I guarantee it's going to be better in a situation like this, where you have a layered landscape. You have a tree, then maybe a dogwood, native azalea, ferns, ground covers, soft landing. The caterpillar falls down. The ground is not compacted. He can easily get underground and pupate. Nobody's going to mow him. Nobody's going to step on him. There's plenty of leaf litter under there to spin the cocoon, much higher survivorship. This is where you can do your fancy spring ephemeral garden. This is how you shrink the lawn. You'll put big beds around your plants, your trees. If you do that around all your trees, then all of a sudden you got a lot less lawn. Use your native ground covers liberally. Things like wild ginger or mayapple or foam flower or ferns, and many, many other examples under your trees. They're all safe sites, soft landings. Survivorship will be much higher. Another graduate student, Desiree Narango, former graduate student, did some wonderful work with chickadees in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and she had one simple question. That was, how well do chickadee populations do in landscapes that are dominated by native plants versus landscapes dominated by non-native plants, by introduced ornamentals? And none of the landscapes were 100% native, but they're just dominated. So the first thing she found out is that when they're dominated by ornamentals, they produce 75% fewer caterpillars. So right away, you've reduced the amount of bird food by 75%. Those landscapes were 60% less likely to have breeding chickadees at all. So there were nest boxes up in everybody's yard, but the chickadees would come and say, well, there's not enough food here. I'm not even going to try to reproduce. If they did try to reproduce, they laid 1.5 fewer eggs. Those clutches were 29% less likely to survive at all. If they did survive, they produced 1.2 fewer fledglings, and it took them 1.5 days longer to reach maturity. And if you put all that into a population growth model as a function of the percentage of non-native woody plant biomass in your yard, from none, 0 to 100%. And we looked at woody plants because that's where chickadees forage. This is what you get. That dotted line right in the middle there, that is replacement rate. That is a rate at which the population has to make babies to replace the adults that die every year. Chickadees don't live that long. And if you breed at that rate, you have a sustainable population. It's not growing, but it's not shrinking either. If you make more babies than adults die, anything above the line there, you've got a growing population. But if you make fewer babies than adults die, which is really happening over here when you've got a high percentage of non-native woody plants, then you have an unsustainable shrinking population. So right here is where those lines intercept very liberally speaking, which suggests you can have up to 30% of your woody plant biomass non-native without destroying the local food web. This is an area of compromise, which is good news to me. If my message was you can't have any non-natives, nobody would listen. We love our non-natives. Here's Dan Getman. That's a ginkgo tree. What does he have a ginkgo tree in the middle of his native planting for? Because his wife liked ginkgo trees and said, please put in a ginkgo tree. Is that tree wrecking his landscape? Is it wrecking the productivity? No. Is it invasive species? No. It's just there. Remember, it's a statue. It's like he just put a little statue up there. So it's not the presence of non-native plants that destroys our food webs. It's the absence of native plants, of those contributors. If we increase the percentage of those high contributing plants, we can tolerate some non-natives for sure. Can we use native plants in formal designs? Of course we can. This is a Lynn O'Shaughnessy design taken by a drone 400 feet up. You don't get more formal than that, and every plant in that landscape is a native plant. So formality is a function of the design. It's not a function of the plants in the design. Our native plants are used in formal designs in Europe every day. And that's okay because they're non-native plants over there. Can we get a pollinator garden into a typical yard like this without offending anybody? Yes, we can. Put a fence around it. This formalizes it. It tells your neighbor it's not just a bunch of weeds you forgot to mow. It's pretty when it's in bloom. You know, it's not very big, but it is servicing a number of species of bees. Remember why we need pollinators. We talk about pollinators all the time, but the only thing I hear is they're pollinating 1/3 of our crops. No, they're pollinating about 1/12 of our crops. And people say, I don't live next to a farm, so I don't need any pollinators. Forget the crop argument. We all need pollinators because they're pollinating 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. If we lost our pollinators, we'd lose 80 to 90% of the plants on the planet. Not an option. Where do we need pollinators? Everywhere we need plants, which is everywhere. What about this one? Much bigger, a Drew Latham design. Imagine the amount of life that is here versus the amount of life over here. Seems like a no-brainer. Can municipalities help us live with nature? Yes, they can, and more of them are doing it. Minnesota has been doing it for a while, a cost-sharing program that encourages homeowners to reduce or replace their lawn with appropriate Minnesota prairie plants. It's called the Lawn to Legume program, very popular. There's an island off Florida that is paying residents to allow burrowing owls, listed species, to burrow in the front yard. This is the way I think the Endangered Species Act should have been written, with carrots rather than sticks. If you have an endangered species on your property, we're going to pay you to take care of it rather than fine you if you use your property. Everybody would want an endangered species. Put a bounty on your invasive plants. That's what St. Louis did, Fayetteville, Arkansas. South Carolina has banned calorie repair altogether. North Carolina, bounty on them. If you take out a calorie repair, you get a free tree replacement. Water utilities, giving people $100 coupons to plant water efficient plants where it's where we have not very much water, although Buffalo is doing this too. There's plenty of water up in Buffalo, but they're giving people $100 coupons. So that's great. And of course, the big lawn replacement programs, conversion programs in California, that's going up. You now get $3 rebate per square foot of lawn that you remove and replace with appropriate xeric plantings. I think we've made 3 missteps in the early years of conservation. And the first one's an important one. We've started to think of nature as if it's optional. I mean, maybe we always thought it was optional. I guess we did the way we warred against it. You know, we like it. We like to come to the zoo and see it. We like to go on walks. We like to watch it on television. But it's not essential. It's really just a form of entertainment. And that means if it's not essential, when push comes to shove, when resources are in short supply, which is always, nature takes a back seat. Recognize that? That's right out in the hall there. And to me, it epitomizes our society's view of the importance of nature. It's there to entertain us. We need nature to entertain our kids in the future. It was Teddy Roosevelt's argument for creating the national park system. These are wonderful places. We got to protect them so that future generations can enjoy them. And I totally get that because nature is enormously entertaining. But it's more than that. We need nature so that we have future generations. A little bit more important. We've also assumed that humans and nature cannot coexist. Now, we talked about this, but if we restrict our conservation efforts just to places where there's not a lot of humans, we're going to fail because those places are too small, too few, too isolated. David Quammen has a wonderful analogy between a Persian rug and an ecosystem. That is a functional Persian rug. That's not 71 Persian rugs. That's 71 rug fragments, none of which are acting like a Persian rug. And that's what we've done to our ecosystems. The UN designates biosphere reserves of places of ecological significance. And I hate that language. I dislike that language because it suggests there's places on planet Earth with no ecological significance. Not so. Every square inch of the planet has ecological significance, including our yards, including our corporate landscapes, including our roadsides, including our agriculture. So we need to put the plants back. We need to glue our rug back together again. Not just to build biological corridors that connect habitats that already exist, so that plants and animals can move back and forth between viable habitats, but to recreate viable habitats where we've destroyed them, where we live, where we work, where we shop, where we play, where we farm. When we do this successfully, and we're starting to do it, it'll be the first time in modern history that we are coexisting with the natural world. That's the future as I see it. This is really, it's a visualization of Homegrown National Park. Our third misstep was to leave Earth stewardship to just a few specialists, a few conservation biologists, a few ecologists. For some reason, we didn't see it as an inherent responsibility of everybody on the planet. But I don't know why, because everybody on the planet depends entirely on the quality of local ecosystems. So why wouldn't everybody have the responsibility of taking care of those ecosystems? Stan Reshworth, the Cherokee elder, once said, the Western settler mindset is, I have rights. The mindset of indigenous people is, I have obligations. You were not born with those mindsets, you are taught them. We're very good at teaching this one. We've been terrible at teaching our kids and our peers that we all have obligations to good Earth stewardship. That doesn't mean you have to save biodiversity for a living, but you can save it where you live. And if you do, it empowers you. You know, right now, most people feel absolutely powerless. The Earth's problems are huge. What can one person do? Well, one person can shrink the lawn. One person can remove the invasive plants on their property. We didn't even talk about that. One person can turn out their lights. One person can use keystone plants. One person can fire Mosquito Joe. One person can totally revitalize the ecosystem in their yard and contribute to their local ecosystem instead of degrade it. And it also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire planet's problems. You get depressed. Just think about the part of the Earth that you can influence. If you own property, it's obvious. That's where you start. If you don't own property, help somebody does. Help a land conservancy, help a park, help a zoo. As volunteers, you know, all these places are underfunded, understaffed. They will love you as a volunteer. So as property owners or volunteers, each one of us has the power, and we certainly have the responsibility to fix dead landscapes like this. Whether or not we decide to do so is going to determine nature's fate and then ultimately our own fate. Now, I think I have convinced my grandchildren that you are nature's best hope. I hope I've convinced you as well. Thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I think we have time for a few questions. Yes, here's one. Is that a question? Good. Do you really? All right. Yes. Mulch? Mulch. Now we're getting into a different talk. No, mulch is, bare ground is the worst situation. The ecosystem under the soil or in the soil they're all important, but that one's essential. That's where the mycorrhizae are. That's where all the decomposers are that turn over the leaves each year, return nutrients to the soil so your plants can take them up again the next year. All of that entire community requires high humidity. It doesn't stay high humid, it doesn't stay moist unless you have mulch on top. The best mulch is the leaf litter that fell from your tree that year, because that contains the nutrients that tree used that year, and they will turn over in the soil and then it can use it again. It's a closed nutrient cycle. When we rake away those leaves, we're raking away those nutrients, we're exposing the soil, we're raking away the 70 species of litter moths that eat dead leaves, we're raking away the banded hair streak that eats dead leaves. We're raking away where our lightning bugs live. They are predators in leaf litters. We're raking away an entire community, all the moths, all the cocoons and things I talked about, so that we can go to the store and buy mulch. So leaf litter is the best. It'd be great if you could find ways to keep it somewhere on your property. You can't pile it 5 feet deep and have your plants come through, but a normal layer of leaf litter, the plants come right through it. I've got lots of pictures to demonstrate that. If you chop it up, you've just chopped up your lightning bugs and everything else, they're all in there. You don't need to chop it up. I know that's an aesthetic thing again, but remember, the fastest way to shrink your lawn and create new beds is to put your leaves over, really pack them on over the lawn under a tree and then plant right through that. You're making a 3-dimensional landscape. So again, I've got lots of pictures of really attractive landscapes planted right through the leaves. And if you look hard, you can see the leaves under there. That's the best. So bare soil is the worst. If you buy mulch or get chipped trees or something, that is better than nothing, but it's not as good as keeping all that other life around. Yes. Okay, cultivars. That is the most common question I get, because when you go to the nursery, that's what you see. Almost everything that's for sale is a cultivar. And there's reasons for that. First of all, the nursery industry, they're starting to come around, but for the last 100 years, the only plants you bought were the prettiest ones. And they're convinced that if they don't make a cultivar out of it, you're not going to buy it. So they're learning that we're actually starting to buy plants. We're sacrificing sometimes a little bit of aesthetics for ecological function. They're starting to learn that. But keep in mind, many cultivars that are for sale are natural variants that were found in nature. So there's no selection other than what happened naturally. They should function as well as the straight species. And when you get into flowers, you're making an echinacea look like a zinnia. Then we're just fooling around with things to make it different for the next year's sale. We did a study comparing 6 cultivar traits of plant structure, not the flowers. So we looked at what happens when you take a green leaf and make it red or purple. What happens when you make it variegated? What happens when you get tall plant, make it short? What happens when you increase berry size? Stuff like that. 6 traits. The only one that consistently reduced insect use was taking a green leaf and making it red or purple, because you've loaded the leaf with anthocyanins that are feeding deterrents. So that could be one generality. I'll say, try to avoid red leaf cultivars. They're not going to enhance anything. For flowers, the news is not quite so good, because when you start fooling with flower shape and you make a double flower, you've removed all of the reproductive parts of the flower. Then you're messing with the very specialized relationship that those specialized pollinators have with that plant. When you're planting a pollinator garden, you plant for the specialists, because the generalists can use those plants as well. But if you mess up the relationship with the specialist, and sometimes it's not obvious because flowers have ultraviolet colors and the bees can see them. We can't see them. So you might change that. Maybe you've changed pollen nutrition, pollen shape. We don't know any of that stuff. So Annie White at the University of Vermont has shown that more often than not, playing around with flowers decreases pollinator use. Not always, there are exceptions. So the real answer is it depends on what the genetic change was, which doesn't answer your question. So, yes. There are those volunteers. Yeah, 82% of us live in cities. Well, not entirely. So yes, you can volunteer, you can vote, you can donate. All of those things are important. Don't forget the voting part. That's really important. But you can put a flowering plant on your porch, on your balcony. Put a milkweed on your balcony. I put a big pot with a lot of milkweed on your balcony, and I really bet that monarchs will come and use it. Put a fall blooming aster. They will use it as they're migrating. Anything that's blooming during the season, those bees really get around. They will find nectar and pollen even in cities during the summer. So in that sense, so it seems like, well, my one little pot's not going to help a lot. Yeah, but if millions of pots are out there, it will help a lot. So there is something you can do. There is no doubt that there are a lot fewer opportunities in cities than there are in more natural areas, but it doesn't mean they're useless. Yes.
So your recipe for the bucket, the anti-mosquito, where do we get that? One. Number two, like my neighbor dad, scores down from my holiday.
Who's seen a mosquito yet this year? Mosquitoes aren't even out yet. You know what? I don't know. You know, going to your neighbor and say, you're not living right, you got to live right me, doesn't work very well. Yeah. I don't know. We're trying to, you know, your neighbor doesn't know that he's killing everything in the planet. The rest, put in mosquito dunks on Google and you get sheets of stuff that come in. You can buy them everywhere. This is not my recipe. This is a product that exists and it's out there. The recipe, remember, it's a bucket full of water and a handful of straw or hay. That's it. We're done. One more. Okay, oaks, willows, and a few other things hybridize readily, which means within groups they hybridize. So within the white oak group, they hybridize within the red oak group, which means they're really closely related. And those hybrids are actually viable most of the time. Nobody's actually compared, you know, whether a hybrid is going to support as many caterpillars as a straight species. But we have compared 15 species of oaks in terms of what they support. And they're really similar. They're really similar. All the oaks are good. All the native oaks are good. We got 91 oak species in this country. You do not need the English oak. You do not need the sawtooth oak from China because they're not as good. They're not going to support as much. But our native oaks, even if they cross with each other, even though we haven't measured, I almost guarantee it that they'll be just fine. They do this naturally. So don't worry about it. Just do it. All right. Thanks a lot.
All right, Doug. Thank you very much. As promised, I said you'd be inspired. I want to give a couple of thank yous. Eileen Barrett, who's on the zoo board, thought of this, sponsored this, and brought Doug to town. And if there's a person who's fired up about pollinators, her name is Christina Anderson, and she pulled this together. We have pollinator kits for sale out here. And when you look at it and say, honey, I don't want to pay $100. Take a look at what's in it, because I can tell you I'm thrifty and we have a bunch in my yard. You can take those home and tomorrow be halfway to what Doug's talking about. So Steve Foltz and his teams put those together. They're out there. We also have some of Doug's books for sale. He's willing to stay and do a book signing. So thank you for coming. Stick around. And thanks for supporting the zoo in our garden.